Welcome everyone. Baruchot habaot to the first of 4 Women's League virtual events of 5781. We welcome so many of you from Israel, Canada, and around the United States. Merle and I look forward to organizing and sharing these events with you. I welcome our president, Debbie Goldich, to share a few thoughts.
Thank you, Susan.
You're
welcome
welcome.
all of you. And as Susan said, this is the first of 4 very exciting programs. This is really one of the crown jewels of Women's League. We have so many women who participate in this, who might not participate in anything else. So we welcome you. We hope that you will spill over a little bit and come visit us at 12 o'clock every day when we do a Psalm service. Rabbi Ellen Wollensfields teaches many days. Many days it's taught by our members. It's an opportunity to say Mishaberach and to recite Mornah's Kaddish. So I welcome you again, and I want to thank Merle and Susan for doing such a wonderful job and stepping up and saying yes, excitedly, I might add, to take over this job, this position in Women's League. And I wish you great learning, great learning today. So thank you.
You're welcome. All right, as some of you may notice, we tend to use the Google Group messaging capacity to keep you informed and to seek your input and feedback. Please contact me, and I've already typed into everyone my email address, Farber's Chevra, in the chat box with suggestions, requests, and questions. So here's our housekeeping for today. First and foremost, this interview is being recorded and will soon be posted or stored on the Women's League for Conservative Judaism website on the Women League Reads page. You can access 20 earlier interviews there as well, and this past spring series of books and more, the virtual conversations that Vivian Lieber organized for us. Secondly, I will try to manage the time. We have approximately 1 hour, and the chat box questions and comments you may share. Dr. Sivan has graciously agreed to respond to questions shared in the chat box, which have not been discussed during the virtual interview. These questions and responses will be shared with participants in the coming week after I've consolidated everything. Merle will introduce our guest, Dr. Miryam Sivan, and pose our questions. Merle, please continue.
Great, thank you. Welcome, everybody. Just a little bit of an intro. Miryam Sivan is a former New Yorker who has lived in Israel for more than 20 years. She teaches literature and writing at the University of Haifa and has published scholarly articles on American and Israeli writers, and a book-length study on Cynthia Ozick's fiction. Her short fiction has appeared in various journals in the United States and the UK, and 2 of her stories were adapted for the stage in London and New York. So Miryam, welcome. Thank you for joining us. And let's start out with a biographical question. I quote from your bio material on your book covers that much of your fiction is about the experiences of expats in love, in flux, in liminal space between cultures, languages, and historical epochs. Does that really tell us about who you are?
So first of all, I wanted to thank Susan and Merle for inviting me to be a part of the Women's League Reads program. It's an honor, and I'm very, very happy to be here. So thank you. And when we talk about concrete, I'll be even more specific. Some writers tend to write very autobiographically. Some tend to write less so. I don't think any writer writes completely non-autobiographically. And by that, I mean, even if there's no resemblance between the plot of a story and the plot of a writer's life, where do we pull from? We pull, if not from actions, and we certainly pull from our emotional reservoir, right? And from our intellectual reservoir. And so how much of that goes through filters, then it depends on the person. I happen to be someone who doesn't write so directly from my life. I like to mix things up, but emotionally, much of what I write, I do pull from my life. And yes, and I am in flux in between cultures, languages.
So tell us a little bit about is your experience similar to Isabel, that you came from the United States and made Aliyah?
Yeah, actually not. I mean, Isabel is quite different than me. I mean, Isabel, made Aliyah in a much more traditional way. She finished university and came to Israel, 22 years old. She's the child of a Holocaust survivor, right, on one side, and a New Yorker on the other, many generations Sephardic heritage. I came to Israel at 35, married with a child. I am not a child of survivors. I don't have, one person in the family traced us back to, Sephardi roots, but, that was a long time ago, and we spent the last 500 years, in Europe. In other parts of Europe, Eastern Europe. So I don't share any of that with Isabel. I have one child, she has three. Where Isabel's very, very different than me. But I can say this. I was inspired to write this book because when I was still living in New York, I was a ghostwriter. Mm-hmm. Okay, for two people, one who was a survivor, and that was going to continue. The publisher very much wanted me to continue to ghostwrite, but I moved here and the internet was just in its early days, and he didn't trust that we could do it over the internet through email at that point. Anyway, but the experience of ghosting for this man was so powerful for me. I felt it was such an honor to be able to bring his story to the page for his family and friends and whoever else he sold the book to or gave the book to, that I knew that I wanted to write about it. Because in some way, in some ways, all writers are ghostwriters. Meaning, even if they're not telling the story of someone else, for them, they're characters. They're ghosting their characters. It's for writers. It's a very exciting idea to think about ghosting, since we're ventriloquists anyway.
So I will say that I find one of my favorite genres to read is Holocaust fiction and memoirs. Mm-hmm. So I think maybe that was something that really connected for me. And reading about how as a ghoster, it becomes so a part of her personal life, and she's so emotionally affected that it made me think how that just even reading those books so much, it affects my personal psyche. So listening to the stories of the Holocaust survivor affects her personal life. And is Holocaust literature something that compels you at all, other than your experience as a ghoster? Do you read a lot of that, or?
Yeah, I teach it. I write about it. As I said, Isabel's on her 16th book. I wrote one, and that was enough. It wasn't enough, but it was so powerful for me. But I didn't need to ghost in order to be haunted, right? This has been a kind of an obsession for many, many decades. I keep trying to get away from it. I teach literature of the Shoah. I'm starting on Thursday to teach it at the International School at the University of Haifa. I've been teaching it for many years, gone to many conferences, written many papers. And I said to the head of the school a few years ago, he's no longer head of the school, but he was at the time. I said, I think I'm done. I really want to teach something else. He was like, no. No. And we have a master's program at the University of Haifa, an English language master's program in the Holocaust. And that's it. Those students, even though I don't teach in the master's program, they're all in my class as well. So I can't seem to get away from teaching it. And obviously there's a need, and I'm teaching to a younger generation and many Europeans and many German students. And so it's a calling as well, but I like Isabel uses the Holocaust as a, I would say an unhealthy filter for her life. I think that I have done that to some extent as well. And I'm trying consciously to move away from that.
All right, so we'll use then that to move away. So one of the quotes that I really loved or resonated for me was, she says, she had it easy all these years sitting at her desk, entering and exiting the pain whenever she felt like it, moving from a railway car, suffocating interior to a hug from one of her children in her spacious kitchen, turning away from witnessing a friend being murdered to having a sexual tryst in the afternoon. So as I reread that, I guess it sort of made me look at things differently, but I will say that the first time I read the book, the thing that really was uncomfortable for me, and I don't know if any of the other readers here, but the idea that she's having 3 affairs really at the same time, her sexual relationships. But then when I read that quote, it sort of clicked for me that she's using that as a way of escape, maybe, from all this Holocaust. So if you could talk a little bit about how you came to create all of her relationships with the different men in her life.
Right. Yeah, in that way, she and I are also different. But I don't know if I definitely don't judge her. I think there were days I was jealous of her.
Right, that's what I couldn't decide if I was or not. I'm in one monogamous relationship all my life, so I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. So at one point in the story, it's when she's I think it's when she's in New York. No, but or she describes it where she says that after a whole day of taking in that Holocaust dreck, that's the word she used, you know, she needs to break out at night. And when she breaks out at night, when the days that she does the interviews, that's very, very hard, right? To sit across from somebody and hear their stories. There's crying. It's an emotional experience. It's a very deep and painful emotional experience to take someone's story down. And so when Isabel, at the end of those days, she needs to break out. And she says she does it with drink and with sex. She just needs to numb herself. So that's what she does. So that's the one thing she does. The other thing what she has with Tzachi, the young, the carpenter, is not that. He is like she feels he's one of the few people that understands her. So on the one hand, yes, it is escape. She wants to, you know, it's hedonistic escape. And there's actually a Holocaust reference there. Maybe it's subtle, but it's there, which is, some of you may know that in the camps, when people could, they fornicated profusely. And after the camps, in the DP camps, there was the highest fertility rate ever recorded in the Western world, for sure. Okay, and not everybody was married. There was the sex as not only as the life force that was in, let's say, the DP camps, right? The babies, they were just having so many babies to replace and to everyone that was lost. But even in the camps, it's the life force, the erotic force can be seen as a force of reclamation and of resistance. I'm now, just parenthetically, I want to say that I'm rereading 1984 after not having read it for decades, because we're having something in the English department next week about it. And there it's very clear. The erotic is revolutionary, right? You see, the erotic is a force of resistance, political resistance. We also see this in Handmaid's Tale. I mean, it's a thing. And so Isabel, she's not making a political statement, but for her, it's basically a middle finger up to the Nazis as well. Now, in addition to that, I am a proud feminist of many decades, child of the 60s, but came to consciousness in the 70s. And for me, as a writer, I've also, or others, my short story collection and many other things I published, I write about women having sex. And in a way that male writers and male characters write about it. And it's not an issue, right? I just read Gary Steingart's first novel that he published in, I think, 2002, the Russian Debutante's Handbook. He has 3 different lovers there. I don't think any reviewer would even think to mention, not him, his character, right? It's such a given that men have sexual lives and that women's sexual lives should, first of all, be prescribed and should not be talked about if they have them. It's not modest. It's not, I mean, there's so many ways to characterize the controlling of female bodies. So I resist that. And my Isabel, as she says, she was monogamous her entire marriage. She's not married now.
Right.
And she can do what she wants. And I mean, one could argue that she's not being fair to her boyfriend, but like she even addresses that he never asks her, and they don't have an agreement.
Right.
So it's an issue for me, actually. I started to write a piece about it, about the reactions to Isabel and her, and because she's a mother. Oh my God, she's not a 24-year-old right out of college, sowing her wild oats in, some foreign city. She's a mother. She has a small child at home. How dare she gallivant?
Well, I won't. Right.
No, I'm being ironic. I know that. I know that's not what you mean, but so
yeah, right. It's more just my own personal, I guess. I can't picture myself that way. That's really, but I see what you're saying is very interesting. The way.
Right. Yeah, it's part of the reclamation of the life force, I think, and also a reaction to. I'm not saying this is healthy or good. I'm just saying this is what it is, right? It's also a reaction to feeling unseen and unappreciated in her marriage.
So, and she has 3 children. So tell us a little bit about her children and how you decided where to place them in. Right. One in the army, one out of the army, one still home. Right.
Not the decisions that at least I make, and they're not always conscious. Basically write and then see what my unconscious threw out, and then decide if it works or not. The unconscious is much smarter when it comes to creativity. I had her have a small child. Uri, because I love writing about small children. I just do. I used to, when my daughter was smaller, I mean, I have many stories. I pulled from her life, actually, for Uri. Many of the cutest statements he made, my child said, including the one in Prague, where he's like, "What do you mean, Mashiach?" Right? She actually did that. I was like, shh. Don't let them hear you. Because and that whole Prague scene very much came from my daughter's first visit to Prague. We used to go to Prague a lot for a while. I wanted her to have a child. And the other thing I was interested in this book is just to show a normal, I mean, she's not really normal because she's an immigrant, but to show life in Israel, right? They live in the Galilee. She's a mother, she's raising children, she's working. And having a child in the army is an enormous experience here, right? A harrowing one, especially for mothers of sons. And so I wanted that. And then her eldest daughter, I guess, is just this, the ideal daughter. Leah, too. First of all, if Isabel's gallivanting and not just with trysts, but going all around the world as she is to interview people and stuff, it's good to have an older child at home who's basically holding down the fort. I mean, Leah's 23. She could do everything. She's like the second mother in the house. I also, Uri's birth, I wanted to, it's always was interesting to me to take advantage as much as I could to show how, as much as Isabel felt a part of Israel and loved being here, she always was reminded of her outsider status, which is the experience of the immigrant, right, all around the world. And when she and her husband decided to have Uri, the second, Israelis a lot of times have second sets of children. As an American, always I was like, wow, it was amazing. Just when these people were like free, right? Because they had 16-year-old. I'm not talking about, a 4-year difference. I'm talking 16, 18-year-old difference. Boom, they went and have, I know many people like this, has a second set of children, which is fine. Everyone, God bless them. But so Isabel fell into that as well, and it wasn't really right for her, even though she, as we see in the book, absolutely adores this child. So it was another way of highlighting how she's different.
That was interesting, and I didn't write that down, but I'm remembering now the quote where her daughter, the middle daughter who's in the army, is going to go off on a experience that and they're
mission.
all nervous about a mission, right? And they're all very nervous, the mothers, and she says that there's that difference between the Israeli mothers and the that you never get used to the idea of what you're putting your children through, or the experience that you're living with your children as an outsider.
Right, because you don't have the army experience yourself, and you didn't have your father and your brother and your boyfriend and your husband. I'm not so sure. I mean, I do think that's true. I mean, anyway, I've seen the difference. I don't have a son, so I didn't have to go through a child in combat. But my daughter
goes
is
to the army.
Huh?
But your daughter has to go.
Yeah, but not combat. There's a very big difference. Believe me. That's the very big difference, combat, not combat.
Right.
Army is army. Yeah, it's not easy. But combat is a whole other level of hard and terror.
Right. So, and you alluded to this before, the significance of using the word concrete in your title, which turns out not just to be the stuff that you pour to create a foundation for a house. Right. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, in an earlier version of the book, Isabel was both the ghostwriter and she was a construction project manager. Okay, what Tzachi does. She had built this house with her husband alone and fell in love with concrete and fell in love with building. That's actually, I did that as well, I have to tell you. I wasn't a project manager, but I fell in love with building and concrete. And so she did both, and it was the building that basically kept her sane with all the ghosting. She was on the construction sites all the time, and then after a while I decided, and so Make It Concrete there was literally because she was working with concrete, even though I kept all that language still, because she's still in love with concrete, and she was making concrete people's stories, right? Making them tangible, manifest in a book. Then I decided that it was too much and gave Tzachi, because anyway, that's whatever, they shared that world. And he took over the project management, and she just went to visit when there were the concrete pours. And so it's that it's that double message. It's that double meaning of actually, and there's actually another level which I hadn't thought about, but I realized when I went to a museum exhibit a few years ago at the Eretz Israel Museum here, where that concrete in the 1950s was seen as the material of Zionism. Right? It was celebrated, and there were poems even written to it. It was the modern material of the modern state. So, and even here now in Israel, even during our first very rigid shutdown, And now during this less rigid shutdown, the concrete's pouring. I can tell you, right all around me. They have not stopped construction for a day. It's like you stop construction in Israel, you close down the country. And I think it's not just economic. I think it's psychological. So all those levels work, because Isabel's trying to rebuild a lot of her, she comes from a wounded family, right? That's very clear. And she's trying to build a new life for herself. And so there's that concrete, there's the manifestation of Shoah stories, and then there's the actual concrete that she loves. And I don't know if anyone's ever seen concrete pours, but they can be very exciting.
Yeah, you describe it almost in a sensual way, the concrete.
It is sensual. I'm telling you, it's incredible when that concrete comes pouring out of that. It looks like a kind of it looks like lava. It's alive. I mean, yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah.
I mean, that's me,
When you describe it coming out of the tube and pouring down, and there was sort of like a sensual kind of feel to it.
Oh, you see, I didn't even think of that, but okay.
It was interesting to me.
Yeah.
I don't know. There was just a feeling that, because I guess I've never really thought about concrete as much, but the way you wrote it was just incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. It is.
So,
it feels,
can we talk a little bit then about her personal brokenness, her need to hear her mother's story,
right.
and that she keeps her. So you mentioned that you're a feminist. Is her desire to hold on to her maiden name, her family name, more that independent Zionist, or is it, a feminist, or is it some need to stay connected or with her family, her father?
I think, yeah, I don't, I guess, I don't know. You know what? I never even thought about it. I guess for me, it's so natural to just keep your name that I assumed that she just would keep her name.
No, because you say at the beginning that she kept her name, like you make sure to say that she kept her name. So
yeah,
it seems like it was an important.
Yeah, because that's her way of holding on to that, right? It's a way, she has a very problematic relationship with her father, but I guess it's the way of holding on to him and holding on to that other part of her heritage. And, as it says in the book, she had years where that's where she was drawn, right? She was drawn to the Hispanic society, to understanding, the Inquisition, she's, Isabel. From one tragedy to the next. What can I say? Poor Isabel. But yes, so it is a very important part of her identity. She looks like a Toledo. She doesn't look like her mother. And yet it's her mother's story, and it's her relationship to her mother that's really primary to her once she gets a little older. But I guess it's obvious, and it's, like, as we say in, drugstore psychology, but why not state it, that Isabel's compulsion to ghostwrite is because she is not able to touch her own mother's story, right? Her mother, it's verboten. Her mother will not let her go there. And so this is a way of sublimation, right? She can't tell her own, so she does it for others. And of course, at the very end, we do know her mother's story, and she won't tell it publicly. And it's not a coincidence that with her knowing her mother's story, finally, that she's able to consider entering into a monogamous, committed relationship with Emmanuel as well. So, yeah, there's something that calms down in her. There's some kind of coming together, some wholesomeness, some maybe healthier mending that goes on. As I said, I teach literature of the Holocaust, and I've read quite a bit about the subject, and a lot's been written about second generation. I am not second generation, as I said, or third, but certainly it's all around me. and was all around me. And I grew up with grandparents who lost many, many siblings, nieces, nephews, great-grandparents of mine died in the Shoah, but not immediate. Right? My parents, my mother was born in Israel, and my father was came to Israel from Palestine, from Germany, in the 30s. But I was raised with it, like it was all around me. But from people who've had it more directly, in terms of parents, you know, many have written that the silence can be very damaging.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, this is true not just with the Shoah, right? There's silence around the subject, and children fill that vacuum with all sorts of things. So her mother, even though she didn't intend to hurt her, that the rigid silence was very, very bad for Isabel. I have to say that it was only in a much later version of the book that I had her mother tell the truth. First of all, decided what it was, and then tell Isabel. And that's also shouldn't have come as such a big surprise to me, because I've written a lot about that, about the abuse of Jewish women in the Holocaust, which was a subject that was silenced for decades.
Right.
It was literally officially silenced. And one of the many reasons is that women themselves didn't speak about it is because, as we know, right, sexual crime is, the crime where the victim feels guilty and shame.
Right.
So
then how does that play, her relationship with her mother and her mother's secrecy, play into Isabel's relationship then with her own children? Is that why she takes them to Prague and is trying to share as much of the history of the Holocaust with them, to educate them? Is that important to her?
yes,
For that reason?
yes, though she does have secrets from her children, but okay, I mean, all children are children and friends are friends, they're not the same. I think it is important for her, but like she says, like when they were in Prague, she saves the last day for the Jewish day.
Right.
Right. Of course, she's going to show them the Jewish history of Prague and the painful Jewish history of Prague, right, which was painful even before the Holocaust. But yes, it is important for her that they know, even though, as I also wrote in the book, which was quite shocking to me in real life, you don't need to work hard at it in Israel, because the children are exposed to it at a very young age. I mean, that little scene that happened with Uri actually did happen with me and my daughter, Erez. I mean, when she came home all excited, and wanted to know if we had relatives that died. And, then she was in the in club. And I was like in shock. I that 5-year-olds had to be told, right? At 4, there was a candle. At 5, there was another candle with singing. I had 6. That's it. She came home knowing about kids stuffed into cattle cars and get the whole thing. And I was quite, as an American, I was like, why so young? Why not wait a few years? And as I said in the book, it wasn't the teacher that said, her teacher would never be that crass, but it was somebody else that said to me, well, the children themselves weren't spared. So why should your child be spared? Just the information. It's very harsh.
Right.
Very harsh. I wouldn't encourage that line of pedagogy. I would spare them a few more years. But so they get the Holocaust information. They're inundated with it here in some extent. But it is important for her to, I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, Isabel's aside from that, I hope the impression is that she's really loves her mother and is very close to her. But there's this wedge between them. But her mother lives the wedge, right? It's not the mother-daughter problem. It's her relationship with herself. Right? The friend at the end intimates that it got between, that it's what ruined her marriage.
Right.
Right. We can't exactly judge her for that. She went through tremendous trauma, her mother.
So, and she went through that tremendous trauma and I guess never really had a way to, or didn't know how to resolve it for herself. And Isabel, in a way, is sort of going through a similar trauma with these stories as being the ghosts. And at one point, she whispers to, I think, Emmanuel, I'm getting lost in the haunted alleyways of my mind. I fear persecution all the time. She really is, it's like she's living it. And then she goes through these experiences where she thinks she sort of is seeing the stories that she's written, that she's like back in that time and living it. So there's the one point toward the end, I think maybe that's when she's sort of, well, you'll tell me. So she's in the house with her dog. That was like the most, I guess to me, the most horrifying part of the book, when she's with her dog and she takes the lipstick and she writes the golem on her forehead, and she thinks that she's about to be attacked, and she sort of is smothering the dog. Really, it's like if you were in the camp smothering your child to keep them from crying out. I felt that was the parallel. And then like she looks down at the dog, is it still alive? I was really afraid the dog was dead. That was really impactful, that section. So is that where she really, that's where it's like the final, she's
that's a kind of climax. And then her mother, when her mother hears the story, she gets on a plane and comes. Right. It's like, that's it. It's too much.
Right.
I mean, Isabel, she lost it. She definitely lost it. But it was a combination of a few things. One, her daughter was in Shechem, right, in Nablus, and she was out of contact, and Isabel, right, was sure that was it, that her child was dead. Well, I think we all have experienced those irrational fears, right? You know, half an hour late, they're dead.
Right.
I can't be the only one.
No, I think we're all
right. Right. I mean, not flat tire. I mean, I'm talking about the days before cell phones, right?
Especially, right.
Or even now with cell phones. In fact, sometimes the cell phone's worse because I'm so used to, my daughter lives now in LA. I'm so used to a steady diet of her calling me that when she doesn't call, it's like, what happened? Right. And it's never something good.
Right.
But okay, so of course, imagine her child is actually in combat. So of course, Isabel, right, thinks the worst. Then this hideaway, this I have to tell you, this actually happened. I used to live in a small town in the north, and my friend rented a house, and I was with him walking around the house, looking at it, to decide whether to rent it or not. And I opened this little door, and there it was. And I freaked out. I knew immediately what it was, me with my background. I mean, I knew immediately what it was, and closed it right away. And I had a very strong emotional reaction. And then asked, like a couple of days later, asked the realtor who I was in touch with because of language issues. I said, who lived there before? And he told me that the house was built by a Holocaust survivor who was a carpenter. And that's how he survived Auschwitz, or one of the camps, through carpentry skills. And I thought to myself, oh my God, this man after the war had to, in the state of Israel, built this. Right? Just in case.
Right? Always.
Just in case. And so when Isabel encounters it, and I didn't go in, I didn't go near it, right? I saw it and it was enough. But for her, it's really, like she says, it's like going into the rabbit hole of history. Right. And it all comes together, all her demons and all her fears and her guilt. And I mean, basically what's happening in the book is Isabel is losing it, right? Like she's the line between then and now and them and her is getting very thin. It's too much. I mean, Emmanuel, her mother, they're right. Stop. Right? She's obsessed. Stop. It's
Right.
not good for the psyche. And in a way, it's her guilt offering that she keeps writing. And it all comes together in that Under the Stairs hideaway. Now with Woody, on the one hand, yeah, there is the echo of, I'm sure lots of children lost their lives under similar circumstances in the war. Children are not good in hideaways. But for me also as an Israeli, I kept thinking of the very, very terrible case in Ma'alot. If anybody, especially the Israelis in the group, remember that, where a mother smothered her child in Ma'alot, which is a town up by the Lebanese border in the 1970s, when there was an infiltration of terrorists into Israel, and she ran into the closet with him.
It was in Nahariya.
It was in
Nahariya.
It was in Nahariya. It was near Nahariya. Okay. And killed him accidentally, but wasn't found by the terrorists. So, you know, that as well, right? Because that echoes with Yael. Still, you know, that war is still going on.
Right.
Right. I'm not going to get political here, but that war is still going on. And it just all came together. Yeah, I would never have. I mean, Isabel and I share that as well. A huge love of dogs, even though I've never had a Jack Russell. Even though now I'm thinking of getting one because I live in an apartment. I've always had, and even when I was writing the book, I had 2 big dogs. But no, I wouldn't. I wanted there to be the fear that, I mean, that it went so far that she could have killed her 4-legged child.
Right.
Right, because he is a member of the family. He is her child in that sense. But no, I wouldn't. You know, I'm one of those that, you know, in all movies and books, it's like, don't touch the kids and don't touch the pets. Do whatever you want to adults. Don't touch the animals. So
you refer to the golem a lot. There are
Yeah.
numerous. I was going to go back and count, but I didn't. Have you ever written about the golem?
Yeah, I have. I
think
have.
that's also
Yeah, I have
another fascinating.
Yeah, I have written about the golem, and what she writes on her forehead is right. Is what's written. What the Maharal Rabbi Lau wrote on the golem's forehead, the Aleph Mem Tet, which is the first, middle, and last letters of the Hebrew alphabet, and it also spells emet, which is truth. And then and this is supposedly Kabbalistically what you're supposed to do when you create a golem, which I don't think we should try it at home. And when you have to destroy the golem, you take off the aleph, and what's left is the word met in Hebrew, which means, they wrote this in the book, which means death. So at that moment, why she does it is that she understands it also that she's a golem, meaning that she's a creature who has, I mean, not in the sense of that she's a victim and she's she doesn't have agency, but she's created herself. Like she's this Holocaust ghostwriter golem, right? She's created this herself. She's no longer in control, right? And that's why that also comes together there. And that's when she realizes it's done. She's no longer going to be a pen for someone else, which is what the golem was, right? The golem was the creature that helped the rabbi fight anti-Semitism, which is what she was doing, right? Helping to fight anti-Semitism by writing Holocaust stories, by bringing them to life in the books.
Oh, I love that. Wow.
I just want to say you've done a wonderful job. We've had a wonderful conversation, I think. There was one very long, complex question that I recall sending to Miryam about a number of references that she's built into the storyline in terms of the events and things that she added in to give historical depth to her story.
Right.
And Judy Kenter is the first person to write a follow-up question, and it was the piece about Cervantes from the Hispanic Museum in New York visit. So if Miryam, if you want to talk about that a little bit and maybe a few of the other historic cultural details that you embedded in the story, and what perhaps motivated you to include all these rich details, like the opening quote, for example, that you have in the prologue from, and I don't have my notes. I'm focusing on what's going on now, so I didn't do the question piece.
No, it's from Samuel Uske, right? The consolation for the tribulations of Israel.
Correct.
Yeah.
So I actually looked that up because I wanted to know more about it. So if you want to talk a little bit about some of those things, I think that would be really great. And I'm going to mute myself.
All right. Happy to. So on an obvious level, right, Isabel, from her mother and her father's side, has this legacy of the Inquisition and the Shoah, right? Two of the more dramatic episodes of, attempted genocide that the Jews have experienced in the last few hundred years. And she kind of, as she says, she bounced back and forth right between them until she settled on the Shoah. Now, she, like me, she loves history, and in order for her to really get obviously for the Shoah, she has to. And the more she knows, the better writer she is, right? I mean, it's not enough to just write a person's story when they tell you their story. You have to. You have to create the context. Right? I mean, a person sits across from you and tells you, the Germans came on this morning, but I, as the writer, need to know much more about the beginning of the war and the pacts, and right, to create. So the same thing is actually true with Spain, and because the book that she's writing over the course of the novel is for a Sephardic Jew, right, Chaim Benjamin, who's from Saloniki. It begged bringing in some of the details, historical facts that people are less familiar with. I mean, it's not something I thought about before, but only while I was writing the book, that Chaim Benjamin is right. Nobody talks about the Inquisition to the same extent that they do the Shoah, but for obvious reasons, because it's hundreds of years ago. But I do remember, when I put this in the book, when the chief rabbis of Israel basically said that the cherem, Jews were actually not allowed to go to Spain after the Inquisition, according to Jewish law, because of what they did to us. And now we are. And I realized that in a kind of historical memory, it's very much alive in Jewish civilization. But it's not so much in, it's not as accessible to us, okay? And I think for obvious reasons, right? Because it's just so much farther in the past. Now, when she goes to the Hispanic Society, which if you're in New York, I can only urge you to go to. I think it just went through some big renovation and hopefully is open soon, or has opened. Very beautiful museum. The part about Cervantes is, I think it's provocative. I didn't make it up, by the way. There is this, just like there's talk about Columbus, Cristobal Colon actually possibly being a Jew, and his ships being full of Jews who were fleeing the Inquisition, the edict. So there is talk of Cervantes possibly, if not being a Jew, then having found the manuscript in prison. And Don Quixote can be read as a kind of outlier Jewish figure. I like that kind of, I put it in because I like it. Why did I have Isabel go into this whole night-long monologue about Hollywood and the Germans, right? And I think that these things are bizarre and kind of uncanny, and I think what's important to me, and that's why I put a lot of it in, is to show how tragically, history repeats itself, right? There's even today, I'm not obviously going to go into any discussions of politics. It's not appropriate here, but to see the level of rhetorical anti-Semitism, right? That's out again in certain European countries. In America is quite disturbing, and I'm Chaim Benjamin pushes her to see the cyclicality, right? To see, and when he says to her, Isabel, Ladino in Auschwitz, it's to say, not only was that true and very moving and very painful, but these things collapse onto themselves, meaning from a Jewish perspective, and I'm definitely not one to, pull the victim card and to like, oy vey's mir all the time. I don't feel that way. But historically, it's just fact that the Jews have this, I don't know what, call it karma, I don't know what it is, but we're targeted in very vicious ways. And Isabel's concerned about that. And her twin legacies, collapse inside of her that way as well, right? And also with her parents, right? And ironically, well, this is like, when parents say to a child, you can't have that, and that's the thing they want, right? So it's the same thing. Her father's like, don't go to history, right? Think forward. And her mother's like, I'm not going there either. So her parents, who represent these two incredibly rich legacies, are basically telling her, don't go there. And that's where she goes.
So it's been wonderful having you. Can we just hear a little bit about what you're working on now and what we should be looking for our next read?
Yeah, well, I'm working on actually 2 books now. One is, it's a very interesting question for me to ask myself, and I don't have an answer. The second book also deals with Spain, Inquisition Spain, and I'm not sure where this is coming from. If you believe in incarnations, then I guess I'm working it out, right? Because it's not an immediate thing in my families, as I said, only hundreds of years ago, but that's true for many European and North African Jews, right? That we were originally from Iberia. But this one book is actually a very different kind of book. It's a Romeo and Juliet story that takes place mostly in the University of Haifa, in Haifa, between 2 doctoral students. So again, not people much younger than me, an Arab Christian man and a Jewish American woman. He's a musician, she's a political scientist, and the roller coaster of that relationship, because these kinds of relationships are openly frowned upon in Israel by all communities. But there's a backstory. It's not just a normal Romeo and Juliet story. This is why it's so weird for me that I did it, but I wanted to do it, and so I just let myself do what I feel like doing. They have a backstory where they were a couple way back when she was a new Christian and he was an old Christian, and so and what happened to them then. Then there are parallels in the old story and the contemporary story, and it's a very different kind of book, but it's been fun to work on. And I just now start, and I'm almost done. I mean, I'm done. I've actually finished it a long time ago. I'm kind of obsessive reviser. And now I'm doing something which is even more interesting, at least to me, which is I have taken out of the boidim, I've taken out of the attic, out of storage, a novel that's 40 years old, a novel that I wrote in my early 20s. It's called The Heights. And I wanted to see, and never was published. It had been nominated for a pushcart for a very big prize, and it was just never published. And I said, let me look at it. And I'm amazed at how I still think it's good. I'm like, wow. So I'm working on that, and I'll see if I can try to get it published. It's a very different story. It takes place entirely in New York, mostly in Washington Heights. New York, anyone? Manhattan, yeah. Northern Manhattan. And it's about a white Jewish drug addict. I think it was a book that was a little bit before its time. It was written in the early 80s, and we weren't that familiar with these kind of drug addicts, even though they existed, obviously. But yeah, And it's a very different kind of book as well, very different voice. And after that, I'm not going to write a book. I want to write a screenplay. And again, I return to Jewish themes. I want to write a screenplay about a blood libel.
Wow.
Happy person. But I'm a very happy person.
And you write all in English, and then are your books translated to Hebrew in?
No, I've had a couple of stories translated into Hebrew and published, but no, I haven't even tried. Truth be told. It's publishing today's for a long time. It's a very hard business, and for an Israeli publisher to invest in translation, right? They usually go for books that have sold very well abroad, and they have a lot of press. So that's okay.
All right. Well, good luck to you, and I'll help create your press and
Thank you.
see how we can help you out.
Thank you.
So thank you very much. It was very interesting. If we have some closing from Susan.
Okay, thank you, Merle, and thank you, Dr. Sivan or Miryam. I just want to add, since we have a few minutes left, there was 2 compelling questions that I would like to ask now. And Gloria posted in the text box, in the chat box, that she, and I think I'm agreeing with her, that most people are unaware of the literature from the Holocaust describing rape of women or the erotic forces that you mentioned in your description earlier of how you're aware of this literature and so forth. So maybe in our follow-up, if there's a way in your email to us, you could maybe give us a brief listing of some of these books. I think that would kind of intrigue people, especially Merle and many others who seem to be very interested in Holocaust literature. The second request I have before we close is Rabbi Ellen, our director, wants to know if you have other books or articles specifically that you could point us to. If you can tell us now briefly, and then again, put that in an email to me so that I could share that with the group. So.
Okay. Well, I have a short story collection called Snafu and Other Stories that came out in 2015. And I have an academic book out on Cynthia Ozick, but unless you're into, academic literary criticism, I would say read Ozick herself. Even though she loved the book, she gave me the huge compliment when I sent her the book, and she said that she finally had a reader, someone who understood what she was doing. I have then articles. It'd be easier if I send it articles on the subject of women in the Shoah and stories that were published in various places. But the book is available, Snafu.
Okay, thank you. One last question, because I think we have enough time. Debbie Block-Tamin, who also lives in Haifa, I don't know where, but she's a Haifa resident. She wanted to know how long it took to write this book, this novel.
I don't know really, because the first draft, I think took me probably about two years, maybe a little less. Yeah, maybe because I was also writing a doctorate. I was building a house, raising a child, but about 2 years. And then I worked on it on and off. And then it had a very long journey, this book. So let's say 2-3 years.
Thank you. Okay, we have a lot of other questions that are very intriguing. And as I mentioned earlier in our introduction to today's virtual conversation, Um, Miryam has agreed for me to send her an email compiling all your questions from the chat box. She's going to respond to them in the coming days, and then I will share the questions in particular with the accompanying answers via the Google group who's participated in this. I know there's some people who are involved that I don't believe I sent them the link, but I will try my best to get with Rabbi Ellen as to who all the participants are in a later date, because once the meeting is over, I won't be able to see the participants list. And then one last thing, Noreen Firestone, who's also in Israel, asks, have Holocaust survivors read this novel and have they shared with you their reaction?
No one, if they have, I don't know. No one has shared with me their reaction.
Okay.
Second generation has shared with me.
Okay, and what have they thought?
Feeling the weight of their parents' experience. It's heavy. It's very heavy.
Well,
I mean, as
I
Isabel
can
said,
speak to that, having a mother who survived Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen, and my dad left Berlin in '34 for Palestine. So, and the silence piece was a very big thing. And now my parents are both deceased, but it wasn't until after my father died that my mother, she started talking a very little about her experiences in the camps, probably because there was nothing to preoccupy her, to focus on. And so all this history of the past just came merging out onto her and troubling her in her last 2 years of her life. So I could see that.
yeah.
Okay.
Isabel says that the revelation that she has, that she can't make it okay for her mother. I think that's a very big thing. She can't make it okay. The wound is there. So.
Yeah, I had to accept that as well.
Yeah.
And that explained why my mother said things she said and did things the way she did it. It really, and other Holocaust survivors that my husband and I have come to know in our lives, we kind of understand all that,
Yeah.
see it falling out. Let me think. Somebody asked, commented, Noreen Firestone again, about the sexual encounter with Emmanuel where he's dressed in a Nazi uniform. She found it disturbing and distasteful, and she commented on the movie The Night Porter with Charlotte Rampling.
Oh, yeah. Horrible movie. Very different. Horrible movie. Because the movie is horrible because it makes the sexual predation of the Nazi on the Jewish woman seem erotic, and like the Jewish woman enjoys, right? Their sexual sadomasochistic play. That wasn't my intention in any way. My intention was that Emmanuel was so desperate. I mean, she even recognizes that, right? Isabel says it. He was so desperate to get her attention and get her speak her, her sexual language. He thought, and they had a history of doing some kind of, play like this, but not Nazi. And she was like, no, I don't do Nazi sex. It wasn't that at all. That wasn't where her erotic appetites went. And he got it wrong. But he's a sweetie. We forgive him.
Okay. And then Helene from Utah asked, because you talk about St. Thomas's Jewish community, she asked if you have read a book called A Marriage of Opposites. And she highly recommended it.
No, but for some reason it sounds familiar, but I'll look for it.
Yeah, I think it's Hoffman, and it's an excellent book, the Inquisition.
Okay.
Marriage of Opposites. I'll write it down.
Yes.
It's a
Okay.
wonderful little synagogue too.
Yeah. So I'll share my closing comments now. And as I said, I know there's a lot of other questions, but I'll bring them up to you via email so we have that as follow-up. Because I know the time it's after 2 o'clock, our time after 9 o'clock, your time, if I am transitioning correctly in the time zones.
Yeah.
So I want to thank Miryam, Sivan, Merle, and all of you, all our participants, for making this event so enjoyable and engaging. I also want to thank Rabbi Ellen, President Debbie Goldich, and the education co-chairs Ellen Bresnick and Julia Loeb for their support and guidance. Please remember that Women's League Reads is a benefit of our membership in Women's League for Conservative Judaism. The next Women's League Reads event will take place on Monday evening, January 18th, 2021 at 7 p.m. Merle and I have invited Sarah Blake, who is, and you have to know there's more than one Sarah Blake author, but this is the Sarah Blake who has written a novel called The Guest Book, and she'll be interviewed by us about that specific book. The book is called, again, The Guest Book, and her name is Sarah with an H, Blake, B-L-A-K-E. Again, we will look forward to your feedback, ideas, questions, and suggestions. If you would like to serve as a member of the Women's League Reads Advisory Circle, you're more than welcome to email me. Again, I've put my email in the chat box. Plus, I think most of you have my email by now. So Merle and I wish all of you well as we look forward to a time of healing and a time of potential change. May we all have strength to confront our future and support each other. Have a great afternoon and a great evening.